Welcome everybody to, yes, welcome everybody to Judaism 201. Today's topic is called Hechsher Kalim, or actually Tevilas Kalim, which is immersing our vessels in a mikveh after we buy them. And there are many misunderstandings about the whole subject. And so it's useful for the whole year, but I figured since it's common for households to acquire a few things before Pesach, this might also be very timely. So basically, I'm going to cover three subjects. What is the obligation? What is it that needs to be toveled? And how do we tovel? So one thing is, it's going to be easier for me to use Hebrew terms because immersing doesn't necessarily get across the concept I want to do. So I just want to tell you what terms I'm going to use. So I'm going to be using the word tovel, which means putting him in a mikveh. I'm going to say kli or kalim, which means your vessels, pots and pans and dishes and silverware and glasses and other things. So kalim is the catch-all word. And also, I really want to stress this part. I am not a posek, and I'm not paskening. I am going to talk halacha in this shir, things that are very simple. I'll say you have to do this and you shouldn't do that. Other things, I'm just going to raise the issues and you should consult. And there are different minhagim or different modes of practice or different opinions on some various issues. So with everything, especially today, you should consult your local rabbi or your local pasuk in terms of exactly what you want to do and how you want to do it. All right, so with no further ado, let's start. I'm going to bring up the source sheet. So the first question is where do we get this idea from that we have to tovel our dishes? So I am going to bring up my source sheet. And it comes from somewhat of a strange place. It comes from these two pasukim. I'm just going to read it out loud real fast. I made an approximate translation from the Hebrew. The words, of course, are ambiguous, like much of Torah is. Gold and silver, copper, iron, tin, and lead, any article that can withstand fire, these you shall pass through fire, and they shall be purified. The word in the pasuk is tahor, except that they must be cleansed, and the word there is yitchata, which comes from the word chet, which is the opposite of cleansed, right? With waters of nida, generally speaking, that means a mikveh. And anything that cannot withstand fire, you have to pass through water. So how do we make sense of all that? So first of all, it's a big tangent and I'm not going to cover the following issue, but this is the source of how to kosher our kalim to begin with. And as we probably know, things that we use with fire that are exposed to fire, like your barbecue grill, they have to be koshered with fire. You get your blowtorch out, or maybe put your oven on self-clean or things like that. Things that do not face extremely hot temperatures, such as all the dishes and silverware you use and aren't related to fire. We kosher them by putting them in boiling water. So we get all that from this pasuk. But we get something else from this pasuk, and that is that the context of where these pasukim occur are right after they talk about the kalim acquired from the Midianites, who we defeated in battle. So Chazal learned from this that any utensil acquired from a non-Jew that is food must be toveled. So first, let's ask why, and then we'll go further. So there are a few reasons posited. The one that makes the most sense to me is that the utensil is undergoing a transformation that is somewhat analogous to a person who's converting. It's like the dish is converting from being a non-Jew's dish to a Jew's dish, right? So just as when a non-Jew converts to being Jewish, they have to go in the mikveh. So too, the kalim of a non-Jew they have to go in the mikveh in order to become usable for the Jew. More importantly, the source of this is Torah. So one of the first misconceptions I want to stress is that this is not a minhag, and this is not a chumrah or a strictness, but this is an actual Torah mitzvah. This is something that every observant Jew has to do. And because it's a mitzvah, we make a bracha on it. And the bracha, just in case we don't know, bracha ta Hashem, asher kiddushanu misav v'sivanu al tavilas kelim, or al tavilas keli if there's just one of them. So the reason why that's important is we'll see that when we're in doubt about whether we need to tovel or not, the ruling when there's a doubt, the ruling will be that we need to tovel it, but don't make the bracha, just in case it turns out we didn't need so. Or even better, what some people prefer to do is tovel it with something that you know does require a bracha, and then together you can make the bracha over the whole thing. So if you have 10 things and 5 of them require bracha and 5 of them you're not sure, you stick them all together and you make the bracha all over them. Okay, fine. Those are the preliminaries. What is it that needs to be toveled? That's the important part. So first of all, if you are borrowing it or renting it, you don't need to. So, because you don't own it. So that's that. If it was repaired, let's see, I'm trying to, hold on a second. If it was repaired by a non-Jew, some people consider that as though that they've created it. So if it was repaired by a non-Jew, you need to consult your local rabbi on that. If it was purchased in a Jewish store, there's no guarantee that a Jew made it. So you need to either ask the store owner or see where it was made or who made it. And if the store owner said that he toveled everything that was in the store, again, there's a machlokas about it, so you need to consult your own posek about whether you should tovel those dishes. All right, let's get to the meat and bones of this shiur. So first of all, only kalim that are related to eating need to be toveled. Rashi says it's because the most common use of metal, which is the original source of this whole thing, the most common use of metal with fire is with our meals. Some are for different reasons, but it doesn't matter. The halacha is clear. So it needs to be used with food, first of all. Which kind of items? So if we go back to the pasuk, we see that it says gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, and lead. So as is typical with the Torah, does that mean every metal, or does it mean, and those are examples of the common ones, or does it mean only those 6 metals? It sort of doesn't matter to us because either every metal, it's a mitzvah deraisa to do it, or maybe just those 6 metals are a mitzvah deraisa, and the rabbis said added on that you have to tovel all your other metal kalim. So anything that's metal, first of all, is you need to tovel. Glass. The Gemara gives an interesting has a discussion about glass, and what they say is that glass has a similarity to metal in the aspect that if it breaks, you can melt it like where the break is and sort of form it back together again. I'm not talking about melting the whole thing down and reforming it, but you can melt I don't know, like soldering something, or I'm not exactly sure, but you can melt it and melt the parts that need to be reattached and attach them together. So the rabbis say that glass requires toveling. And note that Corel is made of tempered glass, so Corel falls into this category. Earthenware. Earthenware cannot be repaired by melting it, and so it does not require tevila. However, here's the rule. Most earthenware kalim that we use, like china, for example, are coated by a glass glaze. So the rule is this, that if it's coated all over, like china is, then it does need to be toveled. If it's coated just on one side, there's a machlokes about which side needs to be toveled. Is it the side that touches the food, or any side, or so we do tovel it, but we don't make a bracha. And I will add that porcelain and corningware fall into this category. Plastic. Some say the plastic is similar to glass because you could repair it by melting it, but most say that the Gemara extended this only to remember, the pasuk only talked about metal, so some say that Chazal only extended it to glass and not to any other material, so that plastic would not fall into this category. Some have the custom, because we're not sure, to tovel it without a bracha. Some don't worry about it at all and do not tovel it at all. That's another question for your rabbi. Things that are kalim that are made out of other materials do not need to be toveled. So wood, in the olden days, they used to have fancy silverware made of bone. They don't require toveling. Now, what about disposable utensils? And I want to say, and I'm probably going to say, I might end up saying it 2 or 3 times, because this is one of my main motivations. Disposable utensils. So I'm going to read. So what's on the screen there is actually from my rabbi class. I got asked this question on my test, and I got this answer right. And this is a quote from my test, my answer. Igros Moshe, that's Rav Moshe Feinstein writes, disposable kalim, which can only be used a few times, do not require tevila. On the other hand, if they can be used a long time, but we just throw them out because they're cheap, they might require tevila. The Michlas Yitzchak formulates it slightly differently. Kalim, which can be used for a long time, require tevila. So the reason why I bring this up is because, for 2 reasons. One is because the question of aluminum tins. Aluminum tins, I think, sort of fall on the border of, if you're using aluminum tins to bake things in, then we only use them once. If you're going to use them like for vegetables, cold vegetables, over and over again, then maybe you would need to tovel them. So this is yet another question for your local Rav. I think most say you do not. Again, if you plan on using one particular tin for vegetables over and over again, you're going to use it like for 10 meals. I think maybe you do need to. However, here is the important thing, and one of the whole reasons why I'm doing this year is because I heard people talk about this, and my whole life I've heard people talk about this. People think that there is an exception to the toveling rule, that you can always use a utensil, you can always use a dish or a pot, you can always use it once before you need to tovel it. That is not true. That is not true. It comes from a slight rewording of what the actual halacha is. The actual halacha is, as we're just discussing right now, is if it can only be used once, then it doesn't need toveling. And that's different from saying you can use it once before you need to tovel it. Catch the difference? Right? If something is disposable and you can only use it once, you don't need to tovel it. It doesn't mean if you buy a pot, you can use it for the first time without toveling it. All right, so I wanted to make sure we covered that. All right, the next question is, what does related to eating mean? So I've brought up 4 factors on the screen here. First of all, does it actually touch the food? If it doesn't, you don't need the tevila. So something like that would be, for example, your stove grates. Your stove grates do not touch food. They don't require tevila. On the other hand, the grates on your barbecue do touch the food, so they would need tevila. The second one is it one of, this is sort of obvious, but just making sure, is it one of the materials that require tevila? So for, if it's made of wood, then it doesn't matter if you're using wood plates, or wood salad bowl. That doesn't matter. You don't need to. The next one, there's a machlokas about, and this is partly this is yet another factor of what makes everything complicated. Is it used for food for final preparation? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But basically, I'm saying, are you using this utensil like to deal with raw food or food that's ready to eat? I'll get to examples in 1 second. Another factor is, does it have any other use? And we're going to talk about these last 2 factors. In fact, we're going to talk about them right now. So let's just say you have a rolling pin. Well, most rolling pins, as far as I know, are made of wood, and wood doesn't require toveling, so you're fine. But let's just say you have a metal rolling pin. That was another question from my test. I don't know if they make it, but for illustrative purposes, let's just say we have a metal rolling pin. So if we look at, so it's made of metal, it touches food, it passes the first 2 categories here. Is it used for final preparation? The answer, I think, is no, right? You use a rolling pin to like roll out your dough, and then you still need to cook it. So that's not the final preparation. And certainly it doesn't have any other use. So because there's a machlokas about whether it's used for preparation, most people say, and again, consult your local rav, but the common minhag, my understanding, is that you tovel it without a bracha. The same would go, for example, the beaters for your mixer, right? It touches food, even though the food is not in the final preparation. Most people say that because we might need to tovel it, you tovel it without a bracha. Let's see what else. Maybe a pepper grinder. Well, no, that doesn't fall in that. A pepper grinder for sure needs toveling because the metal grinds pepper ready for use. A coffee grinder. The coffee is not ready for use, so there's a machlokas about it. So generally, we would tovel that without a bracha. What about the metal blades in your blender? Most people use blenders at least part of the time for food that's ready to eat, like if you make a smoothie or something like that, a milkshake. So that it's metal and it touches the food, so that certainly needs to be toveled. How about measuring spoons? So granted, most often it's used for food that's not in the final preparation, but it can be used for other food. The same thing with a kneading bowl, right? You might only use it for kneading, but you could use it for other things. Or a knife that you've set aside, you're only going to use it for raw meat. Or your scissors that you might use to cut vegetables with. Vegetables are ready to eat. So there's a machlokas about all of those, and nutcrackers, machlokas about all of those. So ask your rav. Items made of two or more materials. When a utensil is made of two different materials, for example, my wife has an immersion blender where the metal part's on the bottom, the top part that you hold is plastic. If it's made of two more materials, if one of them has to, then you need to tovel it. So that would, if your pot is a wooden handle, a thermos container, a kettle, all those would need toveling. Coming down the home stretch here, I know I'm throwing a lot at you. How to tovel. So you may have noticed I kept saying tovel it in a mikveh. You may be wondering, well, why not tovel it in a stream? So it turns out bodies of water are pretty complicated. A mikveh is fine, an ocean is fine, a swimming pool is no good, but streams and rivers are complicated. It's hard to know how much of the water came from a fresh spring, a source, or how much of it is runoff, how much of it is from the rain. So streams are complicated. If you want to use a stream or a river for this, consult your local rabbi. I'm going to be using that phrase a lot, or I have used it a lot already. I'm going to keep using it. Just like when women go to the mikveh, you cannot have a chatzitza. A chatzitza is something that blocks the water from your body or the body of the utensil here. There is an exception, and that is if you don't care about the chatzitza. So, for example, well, I can't think of a good example, but suppose you have a sticker on a sticker on the outside of your glass, and you don't care if the sticker is there or not. In fact, for all intents and purposes, you might leave that sticker on for years. You don't care. In that case, it's okay to leave the sticker on. But since most people like to get the price tag off of off of your utensil, then if you're going to want to take it off, then you need to take it off before you tovel it. All right. Ideally, when you stick the kli in the mikveh, ideally your hands should not be on it, and ideally you should put it in the mikveh and sort of like pass it from one hand to the other, so there's an instant where it's not touching anything. However, and this was a little bit surprising to me, if your hands are wet from the mikveh water, holding it loosely is okay. It's not the ideal situation, but it's okay if your hands are wet from the mikveh water. Needless to say, you need to tovel the entire vessel, including the handles. Even though the handle might be made of wood, you need to tovel the whole vessel. If you are unable to tovel it, so for example, suppose you forgot to tovel it and now it's Shabbos and you need that pot. Or if you're out, if you're going cross country and you're in some town and you bought a dish, you bought a new pot, and you're hundreds of miles from the nearest mikveh. So those are sticky situations. So there are ways around it temporarily. So remember, we talked about earlier that you can always borrow a vessel. So one way around it might be if you give it to a non-Jew and then as a gift, and then ask that person if you can borrow it. Another way for other things, if you take it apart and reassemble it, then it's like you made it. Then it wouldn't require tevila. But if you're going to do anything like that on your own, what's the common refrain? Consult your local rabbi. All right. So let me summarize here. Let me do the stop share. Oh, yeah, one other thing. People aren't going to like this, and I apologize. Appliances. Many places have the following, many websites and the halacha have the following wording. You have to, theoretically at least, you have to tovel your vessels like your toaster. Your toaster touches food just like a pan does. Right there. So for example, a toaster, a deep fryer, your George Foreman grill, or an electric kettle. And these are words I keep reading, and it's what I was taught in my class also. Experience has shown that electric appliances can safely be immersed if after the immersion you allow them to dry for 3 days before you plug them in. So I'm going to insert my own wording here. This is not necessarily true for all appliances these days. In the past, very recently, last couple of years, like 3 years, a lot of them have computer chips in them, which might destroy them. So if you get a new appliance, what's my refrain? Consult your local rabbi. Just don't think that because you bought an appliance and it might short out, if it might ruin it if you put it in the water. It's not that simple. So ask your Rav. All right, I'm going to stop the share here. Here we go. So let me just summarize a bit. I know that there were a lot of rules and regulations here. It was kind of a dry shear. I apologize for that. But my main point was just to teach what the issues are, not necessarily to give halachic rulings, except in the very simple cases, right? If you buy new silverware from your local store, you totally have to tovel it. If you buy a new set, a big box of plasticware from Costco, you definitely do not have to tovel it. So now that you know the issues, you know when you need to consult your rabbi or posek and when you don't need to. That was my main thing. And also to make you aware, again, that this whole urban legend, so to speak, that you can always use a vessel at least once before you need to tovel it is not true. So I'm going to turn off the recording for questions in a moment. But before I do, at least for the recording, I want to say I wish everybody a great Pesach. We are going to meet next week to discuss a very extremely important topic, which is how in the world do we deal with Pesach that starts on a Saturday night? I've already gotten actually many questions informally from the community about that. How do you do Shalashudas? When do you do the search for the chametz? When is the fast of the firstborn? The questions are complicated. The answers actually are fairly simple if you know what you're doing. So that's what I'm going to cover next week. I'm not sure if it's going to be afternoon or evening. We're going to consult Rabbi Deitch. So if I don't see you next week, I wish you a very happy Pesach. And then I'm going to stop the recording and ask for questions. Pause, stop the recording.